Hey, this is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. I believe we are in season 4, episode 5, if my accounting is correct. Welcome to Human Things.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Let's go. All right, Human Things, season 4, episode 5. Rocking the new Popeye shirt today. New glasses. I had 2 choices, and JD made it very clear which pair he would prefer I wear, referencing my other pair of glasses as looking like I was going to play racquetball, which I don't think he realizes dates him as well. Because do people even play racquetball? When I was younger, I'm assuming we're close to the same age. I'm 54. How old are you?
35?
Oh, okay, whatever. Anyway, people played racquetball a lot. I don't know that we still do. So let's get right into things. Number 1, and this is kind of a reference to Daredevil up there. I mean, not to my Mr. Potato Head Daredevil that sits on the shelf up there, but to the show Daredevil. To prepare for the new season of Daredevil, I started to watch the old one on Netflix. A rough show, but there is so much interesting things to mine in the story of Daredevil. I love Daredevil. It was one of my favorite heroes. Even growing up, when I had no interest in spiritual things, I found Daredevil fascinating. We've talked about this before. When I was an atheist, my favorite book character of all time was Aslan. And so there has always been, apparently in my heart or in my spirit, a love of things that are truly Christ, without being able to know that because I didn't see him or understand what he was through the lens which I was trying to evaluate the world. I had a misunderstanding of what he was or what the Christian story was. As I came to the truth of it, I found Christ captivating, attractive. I mean, I still love him more than I love anything else in the world. But when I was rewatching it, and this goes in conjunction with also a Facebook post, I think is where it started. President Trump has divided my friends that are working professional ministry more than anything else probably ever has. Meaning former allies are now finding themselves at odds with each other, sometimes passionately at odds with each other, expressing themselves in something that sounds like outright condemnation, and to me, bordering on hatred. The dislike that they have for each other has grown. And now here's the thing. I understand everything about Donald Trump that the people who really genuinely feel like he is a threat to democracy, I understand what they're seeing. And I've never hidden the fact that I'm not the biggest Donald Trump fan, but I usually restrict my distaste for him as that I just don't feel like he's the kind of guy I would get along with. And I just don't see the constitutional crisis brewing that other people do. I don't see the fascist. I don't see Hitler. I see a guy who doesn't care what he says. I think a guy who's kind of thoughtless about how he expresses himself. I see a guy with impulse control problems, probably some level of narcissism, but I do think that is normal in politics today. It's hard to find somebody who isn't like that, as a matter of fact. The next episode, we will discuss briefly, because I don't want to become everything, the new book by Jake Tapper called Original Sin, about the idea of how they hid the President Biden's gradual inability to think clearly as he grew more and more frail in his older age and his capacity to cognitively function decreased. There was an effort to hide that from people so that we wouldn't know that he actually wasn't in control of the country. I only bring that up because whatever constitutional crisis people see with Donald Trump, that is an actual constitutional crisis. And that's why I want to talk about it a little bit. It is actually a United States constitutional crisis if it's true that the elected representative, the head of the executive branch, was incapable of fulfilling his duties. And instead of having him step down and having the next person up, which would have been Vice President Kamala Harris, take over, we had other people running the presidential duties of the United States, unelected officials handling the presidential duties of the United States. If he can't handle it, then the next person is the vice president. If she can't handle it, then the next person is the Speaker of the House. We have a succession plan. We have a plan in place when people are incapable of fulfilling the duties of their office. What you can never have is someone decide they can't fulfill their duties, but we're not going to let everybody know that, and we're just going to run things behind the scenes, because who is we and who elected you to do so? The vice president was elected on the ticket. She should have been president. I don't care how you feel about that idea. I don't care if you like her or not. Kamala Harris was acting vice president of the United States. If it is true that Joe Biden's cognitive functioning was decreasing to the point that he was no longer capable of fulfilling his duties as president of the United States, at the moment that somebody realized that's true, he needs to step down, and the vice president needs to step into place as an elected official. That is an actual constitutional crisis. So I will be talking about that a little bit more on the next episode, because I have the book arriving today. Haven't read it yet. Right now I'm reading something. I'm reading a lot right now, but one of the books I'm reading I just got yesterday is a book about John Lennon and Paul McCartney and their relationship, understanding it through songs that they wrote together or performed together or worked together. It's really interesting. I like the Beatles. I tend to be more of a Paul guy than a John guy. That's one of the reasons that I liked Get Back when it came out. That for years, all the years I was growing up, I had been told that John Lennon was the genius of the Beatles and that Paul McCartney was sort of the institutional guy that kept the raw genius of John Lennon. It's somewhat in a controlled format that allowed them both to be creative. So John Lennon was the creative guy. Paul was the institutional guy, that together they worked. And that narrative was interesting. It's not true. And Get Back, I think, exposes that more than anything. It's Peter Jackson's way of doing documentaries, which you may not enjoy because he doesn't have any narration. He doesn't frame it for you. It's just sort of a running camera, and he edits it. Obviously, he puts what he wants in there of all of the things that he had. But he doesn't edit much because that thing is crazy long. I can't remember how many hours it is. But what you do get to see is the creative genius of Paul McCartney and undermining this narrative that we have been told for years and years and years, recognizing that both of them brought something. And that's the point of this book, is to talk about how both of them brought something to the table. That's what I'm reading right now. Not particularly interested in talking about that very much because it doesn't apply to what we're doing here. Actually, it does in one way. That's not true, because I was going to talk about this. Well, we use the book to springboard into something. Again, on Facebook, I haven't finished the first thing I was talking about. That's how easy I am, just out there. Okay, the first thing I was talking about was Daredevil. Back to Daredevil, then we'll go. I'm just all over the place. Okay, back to Daredevil. Okay, the first point was on Facebook. I saw one of my friends that is deeply concerned about the direction that this country is going in and the role that they believe that Donald Trump is playing, President Donald Trump is playing in leading this country into a place of, to use their term that they quoted for somebody else, barbarism. And they talked about the level of discourse being lowered, the use of force being elevated, this idea of the raw execution of power and getting things done in the government through presidential fiat. And they said this threatens to descend our country into barbarism. Now, why I want to talk about that, and I'm actually writing a piece on this I've been working on as well, and what it has to do with Daredevil. My first response to it is, how do you define barbarism? Because since 1973 and the explosion of abortion through legalized abortion, at that time it seemed to be something, I think, around 250,000 abortions in the United States a year. That shoots over the next several years after Roe v. Wade up into the 1.5, 1.7 max per year in the late 80s, coming back down to 1.3 for about a 10-year period. Now we don't really have reliable numbers, 1.3 million a year. The explosion of something like 60 million abortions in the United States over the last few decades, over the last 50 years. That is the intentional destruction of the next generation before they were born on a massive scale. And then let's look at the dissolution of the American family. Let's look at the explosion of obesity, the explosion of narcissism, the explosion of divorce rates. Let's look at the explosion of anxiety and depression. Let's look at the isolation that people feel. Let's look at, pornography. I remember reading when I was younger where somebody was making the case, and I've tried to find numbers to support this, but it's difficult to find because it depends on how you calculate things. But they basically made the case that pornography is more popular and enjoys a greater foothold in our society than the NFL, than the movie industry, than the video game industry. It is the most participated in, most watched form of entertainment in our culture. And that a high percentage of the internet is focused on delivering pornography to people. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to gatekeep what we would consider to be illegal pornography, like child pornography. The people who are responsible for deciding what pornography goes on the air struggle to be able to, or what goes online, are struggling to be able to find a way that can both deliver the content you want while minimizing the horrible, abusive, and illegal content that they don't want to participate in sharing to the world. It is so bad, by the way. I heard an interview with somebody whose responsibility it was to be one of the gatekeepers for Meta. And he was talking about how soul destructive the job is. Because it's his job to make sure the worst of the worst doesn't get on. And this isn't farmed out to some guy in Portland, by the way. This is farmed out to countries like African citizens who are trying to make money. And so they're offered the opportunity to work in an environment where they can go in and make money by being the person who looks at the things that people are putting online and finds the things that have to be like beheadings from terrorists or child pornography and things like that, and removing them from those platforms, actively seeing it and getting it off there. And he said, being the gatekeeper for the horrible things that people are trying to put online is soul destructive. It has changed the way that he sees the world and understands the world around him. And that's just the internet. I think one of the most relatable things that I have ever seen in a movie is in Avengers Age of Ultron, where the AI function of Ultron gets online for like 10 seconds and decides the best thing that I can possibly do for planet Earth is to wipe these people off of it. That is how horrible what we put out there is. And that is said at its worst, what this guy is seeing, but what we see is also bad. My son called me and said, why are people so worked up about some of these things? And he was giving me a list of what otherwise trivial things. Why are people worked up about this movie? Why are people worked up about this video game? Why are people so hateful and angry? I was like, son, there was a study done many years ago that brought up, the question was raised that they seem to believe of looking at comment threads on social media, that a significant percentage of the people commenting in comment threads were high-functioning psychopaths that were just online to hurt you. They were just using the internet to reach out and hurt somebody, and they know that they can do it by saying certain things online. And then let's throw in rage bait, the idea that people seem to interact with things that make them crazy angry. And so there's a lot of people who are monetizing their accounts throughout all these different social media platforms, and they're making their money by saying things that they don't believe and that they don't care about, but that they know will drive people into a rage, and they will get on and start interacting with that. And that interaction with them makes them money. This world is insanely broken. And I saw that where he said, it threatens to descend us into barbarism. Like, what do you mean by barbarism? Look at our streets. Look at our world. Look at the way that we talk to each other. Look at the way that we relate to each other. What is it that you think this is going to push us over into that we have not already got? The fact is, we are insensitive to how awful we are. And why I bring up that is because one of the problems, why I bring up Daredevil, there was a great scene in the first season of Daredevil where the existence of Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, is driving Matthew Murdock, the character who is Daredevil, to want to become sort of an avenging angel against him. He is driven so mad by this evil. And so we have obviously, this metaphor for larger things going on in society, but the existence of this evil has driven him so mad that it threatens to make Matthew Murdoch something he shouldn't be. And he is a Catholic, and so he goes to talk to his priest. And as he's talking to him, and he's talking about being bold, being strong enough to do what is necessary, taking in his mind, justifying what he feels like the action that he has to take. And the action that he has to take is to kill Wilson Fisk. He believes that the existence of that evil will justify his response to it. Not catch him in the act of something, hunt him down and kill him. And I thought the priest had the conversation between the two of them is beautiful, but I want to quote, as the priest tries to talk him into another way, to not allowing the craziness of the world to make us even crazier, or to justify how crazy the world is becoming as a rationalization for our uncharitable, unchristian responses to the things that we see in the world, believing that the state of evil is so great that we are required to become some sort of avenging angel, some character that is out there fighting the good fight without fear or getting, like some friends I've said, I want somebody that's not afraid to get in the gutter with them. They're in the gutter. We've got to be brave enough to get in the gutter. We got to get our hands dirty. Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Whether this position is unpopular or popular or whatever, I don't have to do anything. My devotion is to Christ. I have to speak the truth of Christ, the grace and mercy of Christ, the justice of Christ. I have to speak that true to the world, and I owe no man allegiance other than Jesus. And my conscience and my commitment to him and my study of Scripture will dictate how I respond to the world around me. I will not be goaded into becoming anybody's ally if I think that the means by which they are fighting are unchristian. Now, I may have the responsibility to be co-belligerent with somebody. You want to reach a goal. I want to reach a goal. We are both going to fight for that goal on parallel paths, perhaps, that will never cross each other because there's things that you're doing I will never do, but we both want the same thing ultimately. But that co-belligerency can't ever be confused with cooperation in the sense that you and I are alike. And as a Christian, there will be things that I seek that other people seek, but I can't allow the evil of the world to make me into something I don't want to be. As a matter of fact, that was one of the most attractive things about Christ when I first started reading about him, seeing him, was he never allowed the world to make him into something other than what he was. He maintained his character in the face of a world that hated him. And so here's what that priest says to Daredevil in that conversation. There's a wide gulf between inaction and murder, Matthew. Another man's evil does not make you good. Men have used the atrocities of their enemies to justify their own throughout history. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are you struggling with the fact that you don't want to kill this man but have to? Or that you don't have to kill him but want to? And they go on to have in the conversation where the priest says, when righteous succumb to sin, it is as harmful as if the public well were poisoned, because the darkness of such an act, taking a life, will spread to friends, neighbors, and the entire community. And I think in there's such a greater, broader warning. The evil of what we feel we must confront in this world can be so great that we may believe it's necessary to reach deep into the resources of our character and to pull out something monstrous enough to fight it, to confront it, and to maybe not guard our virtue enough. I recently did 2 commencement speeches, and one of the things I talked about in there is that success to a point is not a guarantee of success going forward. Hard work gets you to where you are, and it's easy to mess up when you get there. I heard Nick Saban actually say one time one of the hardest things is not to reach the pinnacle, it's to stay there when you get there. And when I was talking to those young people that were graduating, I told them, success is intentional. Joy, flourishing, these are intentional acts. They are things that you must pursue. Your virtue and the protection of your virtue is an intentional act. If you cease to do those things intentionally, to seek virtue, to seek joy, to seek goodness, if you cease to do those things, to intentionally pursue them, you open yourself up to corruption. And in the face of an evil world, we cannot risk. We have to protect our own virtue, because I love that when he says when the righteous succumb to sin, it is as harmful as if the public well were poisoned. Because the darkness that we allow to foster in us when we believe what we're doing is steeling ourselves to fight great evil spreads to friends and neighbors and the entire community. Now, I understand, again, my friend saying, I'm concerned that the world is going to fall into barbarism by the way they talk. Again, I don't see it. I mean, I think that my position from the beginning has been demonstrated over and over as the judges limit the power of President Trump, as they limit the reach of the executive branch, as Congress pushes back and refuses to pass things that he's putting through. You're seeing the United States government working as it was intended to work. It's just bogging things down, slowing things down, and saying until we have more of an agreement on things, we're not moving forward. You're excited. There's zeal. There's a desire to take things on, but that's just not how our government works. It's going to bog it down. It's going to slow it down. I see the system working. So the areas where I were concerned about the overreach of President Trump, I just don't see him being able to have the power or authority to be able to do that. If he were, then I would become more concerned. But right now I see it working. I see those limitations being put into place. And I don't worry about them because I know the government was designed to move slowly. Let it slow down. Let it bog down. That's a good thing. But when I hear somebody saying we run the risk of descending our culture into barbarism, I worry of what they were seeing before this. What were you missing about what's been going on for the last 50 plus years in the United States? What's left for us to lose? In the sense of, to me, I have argued for years that the United States is not a single functioning thing that has existed. It's reinvented all the time. And that reinvention requires the people of the United States to eventually, as some things, new ideas take root and come into play, for us to look back at what was the genius of the beginning of the United States and decide as a people we still want to be those people. And then we have to intentionally pursue those things. And I think that's where we are right now. I think that we are at a point where we're trying to decide whether we want to stay true to those founding principles or whether we want to become something else entirely. And I think the election of Donald Trump was largely driven by people that said we're not comfortable yet leaving those principles behind. And I think that's a good thing. Even if I don't particularly like him and I don't think he's a great guy, I don't know him. But I think it's a good thing that we still have enough people in the United States that say, look, there was a reason that this experiment has worked for as long as it's worked. It's hasty to abandon it because we've seen what's happened to cultures that have. So there, to me, was an interesting thing bringing in that about Daredevil, was this idea of it's very easy to see the other side and to believe that the other side requires me to become something else to stand against it. I guess I just ask individuals to be humble and recognizing I have a limited role to play in this world. And the first and foremost job that I have is to represent Christ as an ambassador for the kingdom of heaven and the world around me. And that oftentimes the political parties will not align perfectly with that job. And when that happens, I have to be comfortable being a part of neither one of them. Now, one may be less evil than the other, and so I will support that in an effort to limit evil. But my support for that should never be taken as my identity there. My identity is in Christ. And the risks that I see are never to one party or another, but guarding my own virtue. Reinhold Niebuhr, I'm reading his book on moral men and immoral societies. And in there he basically makes the case that men can be moral, societies cannot be. And so the only possibility that you have ultimately in that kind of mindset for a moral society is a society filled with the greatest proportion of moral men and women as we can possibly get. Because he says ultimately as a group, we are worse and we are prone to corruption. All right, so that's the first part. That was what I started to get off track on, right? Yeah, we dovetailed for a second there. We went somewhere else. What was it, JD, that I was going to talk about in the middle of all that? Now I've lost that. I need to write notes down. I usually have a pretty thorough. Whatever it was, we'll skip it. Forget it. I'm not worried about it because I do have something. We have to keep on schedule, and I do have something that I want to address. Not deeply in the sense of this doesn't want to just become a whole show, but I've heard this a lot lately in the last couple of days. In Georgia right now, there is a woman, Adriana Smith, a 30-year-old nurse and mother. She was about 9 weeks pregnant in February when the doctors declared her brain dead after she suffered in a medical emergency. Why? She's becoming a national topic of conversation because the doctors at Emory University Health Hospital have been keeping certain organs functioning since she died and was pronounced dead because they wanted to keep her fetus alive until it was old enough so that they could deliver it. The controversy over all of this is obviously that the statement of the hospital was that they wanted to act in accordance with Georgia's laws and that they would see this act of killing the child as an illegal abortion and open them up to prosecution or lawsuit. So obviously this has become national. Now, why I want to talk about this briefly. Number one, because this is a terrible situation. This is a horribly tragic situation as her family is fighting for the right for her remains. But what I wanted to talk, and this came up many years ago. I was speaking I was invited to a classroom at a college to talk about ethics. And in there, a student brought something like this up. They brought up this, and at the time I'd never heard of this situation actually happening, but they said, what right do you have to treat her like that? And the first thing I heard medically about this, when I looked into this particular case, when we're talking about the case of Adriana Smith, the first thing I read medically was the pronouncement of brain death was that her brain was no longer operating at a level that it could organize the systems any longer. She was no longer a living organism. Now because this is important for how we discuss this issue, because this is an incredibly morally complicated issue. Because we want to say, and even the headline I'm looking at here from NPR, a brain dead woman's pregnancy raises questions about abortion law. And I heard people yesterday on NPR, the reporters, they would often talk about falling into the term life support, that they're keeping her on life support. That's not what I read initially when I was reading about the medical condition that's being discussed here. She's not on life support. Adriana Smith was pronounced dead. Now, at a certain point, we've talked about this before when we talked about the argument that you have to have cognitive or brain function in order to be considered a human person. Now, I reject the idea of differentiating human life between human life and human persons. I don't think that they're two different things, and we can talk about that at length later. But at this point, I don't want to get bogged down in that. I want to talk about the idea that when we defend that view, when we defend the idea that human beings can matter before they have a brain, we say when you're young, before you develop, you can exist as an organism and function as an organism without a brain. But at some point after the fact that the brain becomes the locus of the functioning of that organism, if the brain ceases to function, the living being ceases to exist. The organism is no longer alive. And that is what happened here in this case. When I first read the pronouncement of her brain death, it wasn't just a decrease in cognitive function. What they said about her was her brain function was so damaged that it ceased to be able to organize the functions of her body, which means she is no longer an organism. Under that definition, Adriana Smith died. What's happening is that the doctors at Emory Hospital are using medical and technological means to keep certain organs functioning, using her body as an incubator. But as I told that class when that person brought that up, said, if the person is truly dead, if the human being that we're talking about is dead, then they have no rights in the sense of bodily autonomy rights to make these sorts of decisions. Let's think about this when we talk about the life of the mother. When the issue of the life of the mother comes up, an early pregnancy with like a tubal ectopic pregnancy, we look at this and we say there are two lives. What we call natural evil has occurred. Something that we didn't plan on happening has happened. A bad thing has happened. A terrible, tragic thing has happened. And there are two lives that we have to consider. And if we let the woman die, we lose both lives. But if we act to save the woman, we lose one life. So we have to take the action that preserves life. Now, this isn't considered an abortion because nobody wanted that child to die. It was not intentional destruction of an innocent human life. Natural evil has occurred. A terrible thing has happened, and we're trying to figure out what's the best that we can do with the bad situation that's happened. And in that case, when we talk about the life of the mother, when we talk about the principle of double effect or double effect reasoning, we act in a manner to save the woman, foreseeing that that act will destroy that innocent life, but recognizing that if we do nothing, we lose two lives. And the best thing that we can do, the best act that we can take is an act that preserves life. These doctors have been confronted with a situation. Natural evil has occurred. One life has been lost. Now, whether their motivation initially is or they're afraid of the abortion laws in the state of Georgia, that doesn't absolve them of the need to consider morally what's happening now. Should they take action to preserve the life that's still there? Now, the family is bereaved. The parents have to say, look, we don't know what's going to happen. There's signs or demonstrations and to test that maybe there's going to be issues that happen to our grandchild. As a result of this, they're going to be born with certain incapacities that they may have trouble seeing. They may have development issues. We don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And they said, we don't know that we would have chosen to terminate. We would have liked to have had that choice. But you see the moral problem at this point. Now, there can be an argument about who gets to make decisions about the remains of that daughter, Adriana Smith, but there can't be decisions about who placing the two against each other. She, as an organism, has ceased to function. She died. And now they're trying to figure out what's the best thing that they can do with the bad situation they've been confronted with, and they have a life that's still there, and they're trying to figure out how to serve the needs of that life. This is horrifying. And the state of Georgia has actually already come out and said, the Attorney General of the state of Georgia has come out and said, you have no responsibility to keep doing this. She died. This has nothing to do with the abortion law any longer, which is an interesting, but Ed Setzler, one of the representatives and a friend of the, a person that I've worked with or talked to in the past, he came out and he says, well, I think it's completely appropriate that the hospital do what they can to save the life of the child. I think this is an unusual circumstances, but I think it highlights the value of innocent human life. I think the hospital is acting appropriately. But what we can't do is get bogged down into language like life support. Because that is the hardest thing about thinking this thing through ethically, is that it's difficult to see the body. I cannot imagine what it must be like for her parents to see her body in the hospital and to come to terms with the idea that though her body is present, their daughter is gone. And the discussion here is about what is appropriate and not appropriate to do with her biological remains. Is it right to use them as an incubator for a life, to protect that life from unnecessarily dying? That's the problem. That's the discussion that we're having right now. And it's a hard question. There are no easy answers at the edges of life. That's why we have hard questions, but we have to be clear about what we're talking about. This isn't the rights of Adriana Smith against the rights of her child. She died. This is about what's appropriate to do with her biological remains. And is it appropriate for the hospital to act in such an aggressive way to preserve the life of her unborn child? Ed Setzler thinks it is. Others say it's not. But it's not about abortion, in the sense that this isn't about a woman who was seeking an abortion and couldn't get an abortion. And even if the hospital initially responded this way because they were afraid of abortion laws, they shouldn't have responded that way out of that. There's reasons for them to pursue the line of action they're taking, and there's reasons for them not to pursue it, but none of them should be out of fear of the abortion law. It should be sorting through the idea that they have an innocent life, and they're trying their best to decide what they can do in an effort to save that life. What is a reasonable step in order to preserve that life? Is this reasonable? Is it not? That's the conversation we should be having. But we shouldn't be confusing it by talking about abortion and by trying to lump it into other cases, because there's nothing like any other case. It's just tragedy, and then trying to figure out the best thing that we can do going forward. I don't pretend to have the answer, but I do think I agree with Ed Setzler in the sense that it's appropriate to try to save that life. It's appropriate to take measures to preserve that life. And it's also appropriate to pray that this never happens to anybody ever again, because of how hard and difficult it must be for everyone involved in this. Okay, so that covers that as much as I want to cover it. What frustrated me the most listening to the conversation about it was how often they fell into discussions of life support. There is no effort to treat Adriana Smith as if she's going to recover from this. There is nothing that the child's existence is doing to take away from her ability to recover. There is no recovery. Her brain lost the capacity to operate in an organizing principle for the body. The organism is gone. There is now functioning going on in particular organs in an effort to save the life that may be preserved through this tragedy. And the appropriateness of inappropriateness ought to be dealt with in those terms, not as a discussion of the rights of the mother against a child and an abortion discussion. That's just inappropriate as far as a way to function, as a way to address this. All right, and finally, today I want to look at a couple. We are going through questions that were submitted through a relationship we have with Students for Life of America, and expectation of a coming event that I have with them where I'm going to be addressing questions directly with students. They sent me a list. We've gone through a couple of them already, and we've recorded responses to why should I care, even if the baby is an inconvenience. We talked about the question of privacy. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today, briefly, before we end this show, is one where it says, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, we're in the midst of a time where I think it becomes easier and easier to categorize the people who disagree with us as the bad guys, and as a result of that, justify horrible behavior. And I think that we see it everywhere. Nobody's exempt from this. It's just easy to be goaded into emotional responses to disagreement right now, and to see ourselves as more virtuous than we are, and to see our opponents as more evil than we are. And in some sense, my biggest worry about that is that we see them as irredeemable. My great fear about that, casting them in the light of being irredeemable, is because I think at one time I would have been seen that way by a lot of people. When I was younger, I was an atheist. As I've said many times before, there are moral atheists out there who live ethical lives and treat people well. I was not one of them. I was I love to argue with people about the existence of God. I love to make people feel bad. I tried to intimidate people. I led a reckless, stupid life. I intended to die early. I was in some sort of existential crisis. All of those things going on, but more importantly, I was a jerk. I was just a terrible, terrible human being to anybody around me. I was foul-mouthed. I was aggressive. I was given to arguing and yelling at people. I was wanting to fight. All of these things were just who I was. I was a lot. I was a lot to deal with when I was younger. And so it would have been easy for somebody to see me as a college student and to cast me into the category of irredeemable, which informs why I do things the way that I do them, why I have a knee-jerk reaction against people in ministry, so-called people in ministry, so-called people who are so-called and who are building their platforms through conflict. They are the hero that we need in this moment. They are taking on the forces of evil out there. They are willing to do whatever is necessary to make that fight, to win that fight for you, the listener, you, the supporter, you, the donor. I am out there fighting these people for you, and they're evil and they're awful and they're bad guys. The question that we got was, how do I respond in love? Not just to the argument about rape and incest, but to someone who has been raped. And I would say this, and actually this dovetails for me also where it goes, how can I better explain that a baby's life is of equal value to the woman's life? I think both of those dovetail very nicely together for me, because the answer is simple for me. Every human being is the image bearer of God. And as far as I know, I haven't been given an access to who is irredeemable and who is not. And so I'm not just ever fighting about abortion or the value of human life or against the corrosive worldview out there that tries to convince people of dangerous ideas about what it means to be a human being and what they're allowed to do to other human beings in pursuit of their own happiness, their own fulfillment, their own ambitions, whatever. Everything that I do is in service to the idea of to love your neighbor as yourself. For me, a great side example would be this. My nephew got married. I've been asked oftentimes, or just last weekend, I'm oftentimes asked when young couples say, what is the biggest advice you have, the best advice that you have for a young couple? I always say the same things. You will never win an argument because it's not important that you're right. It's not important that she's right. The marriage is more important than that. Don't try to win arguments. Don't try to win fights. The marriage should always win because you made a commitment before God. And in that commitment, you put that covenant relationship above all. And there will come a moment in that relationship where your pride is going to want you to dig in and to go after them on some point of disagreement. But the marriage has to win. You don't have to win. She doesn't have to win. The marriage has to win. In every argument, every disagreement, everything that you go through as a couple, you have to remember that. That has to be forefront in your mind. There is no me, there is no her, there is us. And what I do every day is to protect us. And I have the same approach to my walk with Christ and my relationship to all people around me. There is no them, there is no me, there is us, and there is him. It is not me and God on one side and them on another. It is God and all the rest of us. And all the rest of us are a mess. So everything that I do in ministry, I hope I always keep in mind in everything that I do, the idea behind it is not just to defend the sanctity of human life for the sake of the unborn, but to create a world where people love their neighbors as themselves, to contribute to a world where that happens more than the opposite, where hate is replaced with love. And we look at the people around us not as impediments to our ability to reach our ambitions, but as the image bearers of God that he left us here to love, aggressively and passionately seek their flourishing. So, those two questions. Number one, how do I treat this conversation? How do I deal when we're talking about the question, how do I respond in love, not just to the argument, but to someone who has been raped? Well, I told myself when I was getting into this earlier, every audience that I talk to, I should, when the question of rape comes up, I should think of it in terms of I'm talking to someone who has been raped. I should remember that sensitivity. By the way, I do this with a lot of different things. I try not to I remember when I'm spreading the love and grace and mercy of Jesus Christ and I'm talking to somebody who identifies themselves as a homosexual, that I should remember that any audience that I'm talking to ought to be treated like that. If somebody that I loved, a friend of mine came to me recently and, was reporting that their son was gay, I shouldn't have to immediately start rolling back into my head and think, did I say something horrible at some point? That should never have happened. Why? Because I should always talk about all human beings as if they were image bearers of God. Even when I believe something's a sin, I should understand it through the idea that the image bearers of God, and all of the efforts that I take are to see them redeemed back into a relationship with God that will set them right with the truth of Christ. And that ought to be done through the love and grace and mercy, and yes, justice requirements of Christ and God and Christianity. But every conversation I have ought to be done with that level of sensitivity, as if someone I loved right in front of me were struggling with that sin, not easily condemned, but brought back into the fold. Not easy to divide us up, but to see them as like me. I was a horrible human being. One single Christian endured my personality because they saw me as worth redeeming. To be sure, there were Christians that I had friendships with, but I mean, they were doing drugs with me and they were doing every bad thing I was doing right alongside me. They were talking about Christianity the whole time they were doing it, which was strange. I remember here's an anecdote for you. I remember one time in college at this party when everyone, and I mean everyone I knew at this party was doing drugs, but it was particularly out on the back deck. They were just smoking a ton of pot together. And all of a sudden, one of my friends who was not a Christian walked up to me and he said, "Your buddy out there is a Christian." And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "He's out there talking about Jesus while everybody's getting stoned and just freaking everyone out." And I went out there and I was like, "What do you want me to do about it?" And he's like, "It's just weird, man. Do something about it." And so I went and talked to him and I said, What's going on, man? Everybody's just here having a party, hanging out. And I understand from everybody that you're smoking pot with them and talking to them about Jesus. And he said, "Yeah, this is my ministry." I was like, "What, my party is your ministry? I don't understand what you're talking about." And he said, because I'm here doing those things with me, they don't feel judged. It's like, I think you are completely misunderstanding what's going on our deck right now. It's not a bunch of people that are like, "Yeah, man, this guy's righteous and sitting here smoking pot with us." They see you as like them, equally messed up, and for some reason talking to them about Jesus, and it's confusing and weird to them. They're not seeing you as the cool Christian. They're seeing you as something odd that doesn't make sense. If you want to talk about Christ, talk about Christ. If you want to get stoned with us, get stoned with us, but don't do both at the same time. That's just weird. And so I had a lot of Christian friends like that. I knew people who were Christians, but they were just doing the same thing I was doing. So they had no answers. Not to any of our group. Like if all of us were struggling in some sense with our existential crisis or some idea about who and what we were, and we were doing things and making bad decisions because we didn't have a good idea about what we weren't going to look to answers with somebody who's in the muck with us, who's living our life just as messed up as we are. It was somebody on the outside who seemed like they had their life together in some sense or another. Not perfect, but who seemed to operate at a level of love and grace and mercy, welcomeness and openness, honesty. All of these things were attractive. And when they endured the harshness of my personality, to be able to love me through that, it opened up an avenue for me to see a path out of the life that I was living into something better. I had to see this beautiful land that existed outside of the world and where I was in order to want to go there. They showed me a better place. And when I saw it, my heart wanted to go. So hopefully when we're talking to people about divisive issues, we remember our job is to show them a better country, a better world, a better way of relationships. If we're out there acting like every other idiot, screaming online, dividing people, yelling, and all for the point of winning, what the crud are you winning? Our argument is they all matter. Every single one of them. Every human that we meet. Zygote, embryo, fetus, child, Russian, Ukrainian, Palestinian, Israeli, American, liberal, Democrat, Republican, libertarian, whatever you are the image bearer of God, and you have equal dignity with all human beings. And I should be sharing the truth with you so that you may see the truth of Christ as attractive. And I don't mean that by being a seeker-sensitive guy. What I mean is by honestly representing the goodness of Christ, so that they can see what it means to be in a good relationship with Christ, and then want to leave the place where they are to seek that goodness. If the person in front of me has been raped, it should be very easy to have this conversation in love. If I love them. And it should be very easy to tell people that the mother and the child, the unborn child and the mother, are equal in value, have equal dignity in human life. If I treat all human beings as if they were equally valuable, as if they had equal dignity. And I say, look, this isn't about who's more valuable than the other. These are hard questions that have come up because we live in a world that says you can do this. But if every human being matters, we shouldn't do this. Even when not doing it, not performing the abortion, means that our entire life is going to change forever. That's just how valuable other human beings are. That's how seriously I have to treat them. That's how intentional I have to be in my relationships with them. They have inestimable value, every single one of them, and they mean more than all of my possessions. And so when I talk to somebody who's a victim of rape, the tragedy of what they've been through should hit me. If I love them as I love myself, as I've been commanded to do by God and Christ, then the tragedy of what they've been through should hit me personally. And it should ooze out of everything that I say, honestly, recognizing rape is a great moral evil. And in a properly ordered world, no human being should ever have to endure it. And I hate that we have to have a conversation about what has happened after rape, when a child has been conceived in it. But do you know what I hate more? The unjust destruction of innocent human life. So here we are. Something terrible has happened, and now we have to talk about this. Because what we can't do is just flip our hand off and say, do what you will. Because every human being matters. And we got to figure out a way to deal with this that doesn't make us worse. We can't let the evil of rape make us worse. We have to find the better avenue through this, the best that we can possibly do with the bad that we've been given. So the answer to the question is, how do I talk in love? Love them. When they hate you, love them. I hated the world around me. I hated everybody that tried to teach me about Jesus. And in doing so, I raged against Christ, raged against Christianity, raged against God. Even so, he reached out to me in love and mercy. And so now I owe it to him to do the same for everyone else. I don't have to pretend like what you're doing is okay to save your feelings. That's not love. What I have to do is to recognize that we're all in this mess together. And that sometimes seeing him can be very, very difficult, to see him and navigate towards him through this. But if you have not encountered anybody that loves you today, I hope and pray that when we meet each other, I can live up to that. I am going to fail at that charge 1,000,000 times before I go to bed tonight. I am going to respond inappropriately to 1,000,000 different things before I go to bed tonight. I know that about myself, but I don't want to. And when push comes to shove, I am at my best when I keep in front of me the value of every human being, every single one of them. So that to me is the answer to that question. How do we respond in love to these tough questions? How do we tell people? How do I communicate? The first thing that we do beyond the tactics of conversation is to be clear what we're arguing for. And for me, the argument is the same. Every human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect. Every single one of them is the image bearer of God. The best explanation for the idea of universal human dignity and universal human rights is that we have dignity and rights by virtue of what we are. And in pursuit of that, I must treat every person as if they're redeemable to the truth. And then I'm not just fighting over the points that I'm arguing. I'm fighting for that person to become a member of the community that lives by a better and higher standard. All right. That is it for this week. Thank you for tuning in to Merely Human Ministries Human Things podcast. This is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. We are doing our best. We are on Instagram. We are on Twitter, a little X, whatever, a little. I know we're on YouTube. We have a website, merelyhumanministries.org. All of the content that we produce, including a bunch of shorts that are produced off of this and including shorts that we record after we get done with this, all of them are at those places. Instagram, YouTube, merelyhumanministries.org. If you want any of those resources, please come there. If you like the content that we're producing, also, please feel free to reach out to us and support us. If you have any questions, submit them. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless.